The foundation of transatlantic relations is strong. Germany and the United States are connected through a centuries-long common history and share many values: respect for human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, the rule of law, and human rights. In light of a changing geopolitical environment, transatlantic cooperation is more important than ever. Against this backdrop, the Aspen Institute Germany has launched a strategic dialogue on the transatlantic trade and tech agenda, bringing together key transatlantic policymakers as well as business, academia, and civil society representatives. The German-American Trade and Tech Conference took place from February 14th to 15th, 2023.
When the United States, Germany, and the European Union focus on our differences, we make headlines. But when we work together, we make history.
We're living in an era of unprecedented technological change, experiencing and shaping innovations that could have a major impact on how we trade, who trades, and what is traded.
It's important that the US and the EU partnership really leads the world, that democracies lead the world.
Over decades, trade has contributed to economic growth, prosperity, poverty reduction, and job creation worldwide. In a geopolitical environment which is increasingly characterized by decoupling, bloc building, and the weaponization of trade, a concerted push towards open, rules-based, and sustainable trade is more important than ever. At the same time, overdependence on autocratic regimes needs to be reduced, and value chains need to be diversified.
The US and the EU need to join forces, and the biggest choice for me is not for Europe to choose between the US and China, but it's for the US to choose whether to join forces with Europe or whether to let China win.
The big chance that we see is through reaching trade agreements, we can support the growth of trade overall with those markets.
So if we have very fast evolving technology, it's required that we have standards that understand the regulatory environment and enable to use new technology under the same policy, but with new possibilities that are offered by these new technical standards.
Now is really the time to understand what's at stake and set the right rules, standards, and norms around it so that we can, technology is going to march forward, whether US companies do it or European companies do it or Chinese companies or other companies. It's happening. So how do we do it well? And that takes a lot of collaboration and investment and coming up with the right structures.
So looking back, standard setting was always a political issue, always. You know, obviously a technical as a given, but also politically. And that's why this dynamic has to change with the global changes also.
The transatlantic relationship can no longer just be Germany and the United States. It has to now be the wider Europe, but Germany has such a crucial role to play in Europe that I think through the nature of the German-American transatlantic relationship, then it helps to really bolster Europe's relationship with the United States.
We cannot live in a world in which our friends are the only ones dealing with climate problems or public health problems. We live in one world, we have to share it, we have to deal with these things collectively, and part of that is through international trade.
What is an ideal or modern free trade agreement? I think it's a free trade agreement that is also focused on environmental sustainability and is also focused on inclusivity.
Trade and technology are inseparably linked. The United States and the EU have to work together within the context of the Trade and Technology Council to ensure that innovation continues to drive the digital and the green transition. At the same time, effective export controls and investment screening are necessary so that technology does not fall into the wrong hands.
Sustainable supply chains means that we find a way with international partners and design the supply chains in a way where everybody along that supply chain makes what he or she or the country can do best.
Sustainable supply chains first is stop being naive. We have been very naive in the past years when it comes to having supply of gas from Russia, for example, but also in the corona crisis.
The transatlantic relationship in the economic sphere needs to think about how, if we're not going to do a rules-based international order, that fairy tale story, then how do we embed our alliance partners into economic networks where that group of country wins and they can depend on each other?
Being a leader is difficult, and really implementing Zeitenwende is also very, very costly. So why do all this if somebody else is doing it, right? And this is, the current state of play.
I think what we have seen in Ukraine during this conflict is this extraordinary solidarity of the Western cyber community to mobilize quickly, in order to help and assist Ukraine.
The main purpose of the TTC is to not to give the same answers at every point to the same to at least similar challenges, but to have the same framework and the same preconditions and the same level playing field.
I think a key premise of the TTC, with which I think Rupert and Dr. Lindner would agree, is that there's an extraordinary alignment in U.S. values and U.S. and EU values and perspectives.
Technology, digital, and trade are no longer living in silos. So if you want to have an effective trade policy, you have to know what your tech people are doing.
There could hardly be a better moment to talk about transatlantic relations, trade, and technology. COVID is still present, climate change is increasingly tangible, and the war in Ukraine and the resulting energy crisis forces us to review our assumptions.
A strong, future-proof transatlantic partnership is indispensable for both the EU and the United States. Only together will we be able to tackle today's biggest challenges: climate change, pandemics, poverty and income inequality, geopolitical frictions, cyber attacks, and wars.